In this video, let's talk about the importance of pattern making. So I've been making patterns all day today, and I've been making patterns for a long time now. And halfway through it, I realized that it's a lot more complex than what people would think. So I've been making patterns all morning, and right now I'm making a pattern from scratch, so there's nothing to go off of. And in the middle of making it, I kind of realized that it's almost easier to make patterns from scratch compared to making patterns from like a previous project. Like if you're cutting up an Air Jordan, sometimes it's actually more complicated to make a pattern from those previous panels compared to just making one from scratch. These are some of the examples that I have right now with the project that I'm currently creating, and it's a lot more easier to make this from scratch compared to using like previous panels. I know my measurement, I know what angle has to be what. Now all of these are just 90-degree angles, so I just got to get the measurements correct, and then other side vice versa, I got them all correct. And sometimes I'm using inches, sometimes I'm using centimeters. For all of this is inches, but then for the main panels, those are all centimeters, just because it's a lot more detailed. It's a little bit smaller measurement, but it's a lot easier to get like 23 centimeters compared to like 6.2 inches. It's a lot more easier, especially when you're measuring these out. Now this brings me to making patterns from scratch compared to making patterns from panels. What are the differences? Why is one harder than the other? Why is one, a lot easier? But then also there's a lot more stuff you got to add to a panel, even though you have the panel in front of your face. Let's talk about making patterns from scratch. So personally, I think it's a lot easier than making patterns from like a previous panel, and we'll talk about that later. But making a pattern from scratch, you know what it looks like, you know the measurements of it, and you could pick, as I said, whether centimeters or inches, but you pretty much know what it's going to look out to be. You can make a 3D rendering, on a piece of paper. You get one from the internet. You could even do one on your computer. You know the project that you're going to finish off, and you know what it's going to look like. You just got to get the measurements correct. Now the side effect with this, unfortunately, is sometimes if you aren't really good at this, it takes a lot of practice. But if you aren't good at this, fortunately, you'll go through a lot of material, and you'll go through like cutting and then restitching, cutting and restitching until you get the pattern correct. It's really fun, and it's super easy as long as you get the angles and measurements correct. Now what do I mean by measurements and angles? We're like, here's a little trial and error. This is the center line. This was originally the center line. Then I cut off material on this side, so then I repositioned it to pencil. Now I use like different colors. That makes it a lot easier to know what measurements are what. But in this case, for the project I'm doing right now, it's pen and pencil. So on all of these, this is like another one. So this was a measurement. It was 1.5, 6.5, and now it's already cut up, and this is just excess waste. But like, I always write it down. I always write the measurement and the numbers down to get it correct. And then second, what I do is I do everything in pencil, so it's easy to erase, go back, erase, go back. And then once I'm finished, I go back over it with a pen just to make sure that those lines are correct. So I drew this little box up real quick, but it literally shows you all the angles that you need. Now I could always go off of the center line. We could extend that as long as we want. We could extend that as long as we want. We also have this point and this point, which gives us a 90. You also got on the other side, it gives us a 90. I always start with a box. I don't know why. Maybe this is some scientific thing. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a weird thing that I do. But I always go off of that because I could always get the exact measurements on each side. So this is an inch by an inch. I know that that's half an inch, half an inch, half an inch, half an inch. And then we could also go up. So say that I want to like make an angle right here. I could go out like 3 inches, then I go up. But then if we want an angle, then I could go here, and then you can measure it outside here and you create an angle. This is what I always use, and maybe that didn't make sense right there, but this is what I always use. So I always do a box. I go off of the measurements from there, so I always know how accurate it is compared to just like drawing stuff out and then measuring it over time. Also, what I have is my cutting mat, and it's all inch by inch. It is 35 inches by 24 inches. So this is all like a square grid, and it's really easy to measure stuff off of, especially when you're using something like this. This isn't really a yardstick. This is just 24 inches, but it does the job because it's long enough where you got that metal line that's really straight, and there's nothing that's gonna cut in. Like if I have a knife or whatever, earlier I actually cut into my ruler. This is an old wooden ruler, and as you can see, I cut in right there, unfortunately. And I was using a really sharp blade, so maybe, just stick to something like this. Now also, how I get really straight measurements is I have a right ruler. I don't know what this is called, but I'll call it a right because it's at a right angle, right? You see what I did there? 45 degrees, baby, let's go. But I use this as well. This is 11 inches by 7 inches. It does the job. It gets all the angles that I need, and this is pretty much all that I use. I don't really use anything else. I mean, I guess you could use the not the protractor, the other thing. I don't know what it's called, but you probably know what I'm talking about. I have it around here somewhere, but I just never use it. You get the angle right and like do circular stuff. Cool stuff like that, but I don't really use that just because everything that I do is pretty much angles, and everything that's curvy is stuff that I trace on other materials or off of other materials. Another thing that I do is I use a lot of tape because I do not care if I'm using tape or whatnot. Whenever I'm making panels like this, I always tape it on, make sure it's measured correctly. This is like the body, and then this is another piece, but I always just tape it on. Who cares? You know, you could always rip the tape off. You could always make another pattern. I always make stuff from a box, from a square. I go out with the angles, and then from there we start working our magic. My mind just like does some weird stuff, even though they say you don't use math after high school. I feel like this isn't like the right way to do it, but it always worked for me. It always clicks for me because I know how to do math quick in my head and angles in my head. For some reason, it just makes sense. I just do, and boom. Before you know, you got like a really cool project. And if you're wondering what patterns I'm making right now, it's for some cool projects in the future where we're gonna be deconstructing sneakers and making it into cool stuff, whether it's like a wallet, a lighter cover, maybe a bag. I don't know. Hey, you gotta stay tuned, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, share this video with a friend. But that's what we're working on right now. So that's what I would have to do. Now making patterns from a panel that we already have. I think this is gonna apply to most of the people compared to the previous one. And this is gonna be applying to you if you're cutting up a Jordan, Air Force One, sneaker, maybe if you're making like clothes or a bag. This is gonna apply to you because we now have a panel to work with, but we gotta trace it out. We gotta make it accurate as possible because sometimes you get the piece and it's not very accurate. If you wanna learn the pattern making process in depth, join my shoemaking course, link down in the description. I teach from start to finish how to make your own sneaker, pattern make, deconstruct, reconstruct. You learn all of this, but more in depth, as well as you learn how to make a Jordan from scratch. Hey, join today, you don't wanna miss out. I'm gonna use this mid that I cut in half for a video as an example. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. It was a cool video. I cut this up so we got low tops instead of mids. Now, why am I using this? Well, as you can see, it's a little dysmorphed because this back piece is all like sucked in, maybe from the acetone taking the sole off the bottom, like at size 13 if you want to hook your boy up. But this is what we're working with. And now this is a trouble that we get into making patterns because now we're working with a panel that's all like, it looks weird, it's all sucked in, it's pulled out in other areas. So then when I cut this up and I take it off the panel, it's actually gonna look like this on like flat surface, or maybe even bubbled up where if you flatten it, it doesn't really work out right, and it's really annoying. It's really hard to work with. Now, if you're running into a problem like this where it's just like all sucked in or it's just not its original pattern, steam it, get it warm, and then it should soften up and be able to trace a lot easier, and it should go back to its original form. If you don't, then this is what we do. We get the piece and you pretty much just stretch it out and then you hope for the best. Now, say that we got a panel like this. We got the wing, we got to cut it all, we got to work with it. Now, what do we do next? Well, we trace it, right? Now, here's the fun part and the annoying part with the pattern making of a sneaker as well. I've personally made all my patterns that I use nowadays. I did have some old ones in the past, but now what I use are just ones that I've made. And what I've realized is when you're pattern making, you trace out a pattern, and then when you put the pattern next to the panel, it doesn't work right, and you're like, what the heck? And then you retrace it and you retrace it, and when you realize it is a little weirdly shaped, or sometimes when you like place something on it and it's leather, it actually like stretches, or maybe it's like a really old worn shoe. So it's actually stretched more than what it came out of factory. So it's like it's an actual different piece of material than what it was previously made to be. Hopefully you learned something from this video. If you did, smash the like button as well as subscribe. Turn on notifications. It really helps out the channel. We're growing fast. Thank you for all the support. Check this video out right here. Bloop.